If there's none right now, I'll just bring it straight back to the panel. So I'll allow Nick to respond to that, and then I'll let Michael come back in.
Yeah, no, I broadly agree with you. I don't want to denigrate sort of the significance of the industrial working class, the sort of historical role in bringing about labor laws, workers' rights, all of these sorts of things. And Timothy Mitchell has a really interesting book, Carbon Democracy, where he basically argues that the industrial working class was behind the formation of democracy in many ways. So it has a historical role, which has brought about a number of benefits, I think. I may debate a bit more, I could be wrong about this, but I may debate a bit more about it being a revolutionary agent. I think it's a strong political agent for reformist change. I think that if it succeeded, it would have led to something like the Soviet Union. Not necessarily totalitarian, but in the sense of this emphasis on productivity at all costs over everything else. And so I think that it would have been problematic if the working class properly had taken over. As far as today, sort of globally, I'm a bit more, I think, pessimistic about the chances of, say, the Chinese working class. I think for a couple of reasons. One is, again, the sort of size of the working class in absolute numbers is massive, but in relative numbers is, again, less than it was in Germany, in the UK, and the US. So there's that sort of aspect in which they're a smaller class. The other aspect is they're rapidly being automated. So they very successfully have been mobilizing for increased wages over the past 15, 20 years. But the response has been, well, automation, massive automation. And China in many ways is undergoing a deindustrialization process, automating a number of these things. Foxconn is one of the major examples. So investment in like 1 million new robots and replacing 1 million workers instead. So I think that the basis within factories is rapidly decreasing. And so if the Chinese working class is going to do anything, they need to do it quickly. Now this is then a problem for thinking about how does change come about. I don't necessarily have an answer. I mean, to me, the major problem with the left today is material points of leverage. So how did the working class have power in the past? By being able to disrupt capitalist circulation, capitalist production in key points. It no longer has this because of automation. And this is what we need to be thinking about, is where is a material point of leverage? How do we disrupt capital in such a way that we can put political pressure on it to further our own interests? Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And yeah, Michael.
Well, can I just make a couple of points on this important discussion of it? Firstly, the point I made at the beginning was whether we talk about a post-industrial society. Globally, the industrial working class is still growing. It is not declining. It is still growing. It's going to be 800 million by the end of this decade. As a share of the total workforce in the world, it is also growing. It is not the largest share. Agriculture is still very large, and services, which is an amorphous definition, which includes what I would consider a large section of industrial workers as well, is also growing. But actually, in the last 15 years, the industrial workforce, as defined very narrowly, manufacturing and the mining and the heavy industries, is growing as a share of the total workforce globally. So we're not yet, in my view, into a post-industrial economy or society globally. So I think that's an important point to remember. We're a little bit just looking at what the situation is in the UK or the US or Europe. Capitalism is still expanding in that traditional industrializing way. It still hasn't sucked up everything that it can out of the exploitation of labour. Second point I would make is that the working class is not just the industrial working class. It never has been. There are other sections of the working class. Yes, they may not be so concentrated in factories and plants and offices, which allow more collective action on the part of the class against the owners of capital for organisation of labour. But there's a whole range of other workers who have to work for a living, who can't be considered anything else but working class, who may not be so well organised. And what we've been going through in the last 25, 30 years in the UK, the US and Europe is a whole range of new sections, new industries, creative industries, high-tech industries, software industries, all that area which is broadly unorganised. It's not collectively organised. It doesn't mean to say that it won't, over the next period, in my view, not play a role in trying to change society. It will just sit there like a passive agent and be unable to change anything. And I think there have been opportunities in the past when the working class, both industrial and non-industrial, has had the opportunity to change society. And it has not succeeded. Capitalism, after 200 years or so, is still the dominant, increasingly the dominant form of mode of production, the only one, and yet it still has room for expansion, clearly. There's still hundreds of millions of people in the countryside that can still be exploited through industrialisation and so on, and through the process which is also taking place of moving out of industry into these other new sectors which we no longer consider industrial. I'll make a point about a post-industrial society which has been referred to. That might be our ambition. Our ambition is to move to have a society where we're free from toil. And people still want to work. I mean, I don't work much in the traditional sense anymore because I'm virtually retired. But I think I'm still working. I'm still thinking. I'm still trying to do things. But I'm not toiling for a living, which is what we all have to do, most of us, not everybody, but nearly everybody has to. It's the ending of toil, raising the productivity of labour in the global economy to the point where we're using technology and robots and so on, so that we have reduced our time of toil to the barest minimum, and we have leisure, or at least we have time for doing what we want to do in terms of working. That's freedom. That's real freedom. Anybody who sits here knows that freedom means having plenty of time and plenty of material conditions to enable you to use that time in the way you want. We don't have it. Most of us don't have it. We never will have it. Billions of people have never had it. We still haven't got to that transition of freedom. But, and I'll make this point, yes, so industry has declined as a share of the total economy. Has it meant that hours have been reduced? Is the post-industrial society led to leisure time? No. Well, the working week of the average person in the OECD economies has not declined at all. I remember Keynes made a speech in 1931 where he told his students like this in the middle of the Depression, don't worry, the Depression will soon go away, capitalism will go forward, and by the time you're my age, you'll all be working a 15-hour week. Well, I'm afraid Keynes was wrong. People are working long hours in China, but they're also working long hours here in Manchester. Things haven't changed even if they're not working in the industry. Work is unfortunately still central to people's lives. There isn't any choice about it, and we have to have work in order to make wages. So the transition to freedom is another process which is not just involved by thinking about post-industrial societies.
Thank you. There's a question right at the back there, Dave, and then I've got a guy at the front, and then you.
Yeah, I think Nick's point about, there's going to be a point when...
Speak any closer into the mic?
Sorry?
Could you speak a little bit closer into the mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's going to come a point when there's not enough work to go around, but what do people do then? And what is because people need a purpose, and if it's not work, then what is it? And are we really free to choose it? Because right now I think if there wasn't work, then we wouldn't be free to choose it. To sort of to watch your TV, to sort of everything that the media puts in front of us. That's what we would take right now. So I don't know if there's a panel got any suggestions to what this purpose would be if it's not work.
Thank you. And Dave, there's a guy right here on the front row. We could make our way down. Sorry, microphone just on its way.
Hi, yes. I have a question about how you build class consciousness, because I think that's kind of what we've been talking about. That Marx thought the proletarianization would build a class consciousness around the working class, and the organisations that offered the cohesive identity, like the unions, have largely been attacked and fallen away. And something that Thatcherism and neoliberalism has been able to do is it's been able to offer a utopian project around consumerism, that you could buy your way into freedom, that you could buy your way into a utopian project. So we focused a lot on the class as a working class. I was wondering if there were any opportunity for building class consciousness around consumers. You know, we've been sold this idea that you could work harder, you will, you know, potentially get a degree, get a house, get a job, and you can kind of work your way into utopia. Is there potential for having a backlash as a consumerist class? And I was wondering, maybe debt could be one of those things that we all rally against, because a lot of people take on debt for different reasons. It's something we all experience as consumers. I was just wondering the panel's thoughts on that.
Thank you. I'll take 2 more questions. There's a guy over there at the bar. If people could pass the mic along, that would be very helpful. I'll take you on the camera, and then I've got you at the back, but I'll come round to the speakers before we do that. Thank you.
Charlie, sorry, we've also got a question down here. There's quite a few people.
Oh, okay.
See them down there.
Oh yeah, please make yourself known to me if there's questions. I'll take these next 2 questions and we'll throw it out again for a round after that. But yeah, please at the bar.
Just on something that Nick said. He talked about looking beyond the organised labour movement as a conclusion of economic deindustrialization. I think there's a problem with that in that it actually adopts a view of the labour movement which doesn't actually capture what it's about. It isn't just about disrupting. Or it isn't just about disrupting industrial production. The role of the labour movement is to organise all the rest of us against capital. I guess the question is if what you're talking about is how we can fight back in terms of a deindustrialised economy. We have to be able to organise ourselves, and there isn't a shortcut to having a labour movement of sorts. It might look different. It might. I'd hope that it doesn't look like Unison does in Manchester City Council, where Unison is actively collaborating to carry out redundancies. It doesn't look like that. But that doesn't mean that the conclusions of the 21st century capitalism is that we can possibly fight against capital without a labour movement. The point of it isn't just about fighting against industrial capital. It's about organising ourselves as a revolutionary and democratic force, and I don't think there's a shortcut to that.
Thank you. And just down here, the cameraman, please.
Hi, well, I just wanted to say in response to the guy at the back that I work now, and I have worked for quite a number of years, and I've never thought of it as my purpose.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to the panel, and then I've got some more. Apparently there is some behind the pillar, which I can't see, but I'll let Nick come back first, and then Michael.
Okay. Yeah. So the sort of question of what is freedom after work, or what is our purpose after work? I think it's one of the biggest sort of philosophical questions that you can sort of ask. But I mean, broadly, the sort of distinction that Michael sort of alluded to between toil and sort of work. So we all do things, say learning a musical instrument or reading a book and writing these sorts of things. I really enjoy it, but it is work. When I go to make money, that's toil. I do things I don't enjoy, and I only do it because I get paid and I have to survive. The idea is to eliminate toil and allow us to do work and do our own sort of orient ourselves. Now, the major issue with this is that it can't just be a sort of libertarian unleashing of desires. And the main point here is that our desires are so shaped by capitalist society, consumerism and all these sorts of things, that to just say unleash consumers' desires seems a bit perverse to call that freedom. So I think we really have to give sort of a philosophical reflection of what freedom means. If it's not just an unleashing of desires, and if it's not, just free time, if we're not satisfied with just free time being freedom. The sort of second question here, about the potential for consumer and sort of a focus on consumerism and consumers and a focus on debt. I think both of them have their role, both of them have their purpose. I don't know if I would say that they would bring about a massive change. I think when you look at sort of the stuff that has been done around debt, things sort of like rolling jubilee in the United States and things like this, they're sort of survival mechanisms. They're ways to allow people to continue existing in a capitalist society, but they don't fundamentally transform that capitalist society. They're good, rolling jubilee is great, and I think these sorts of things are great. but we shouldn't be under the illusion that they're going to transform things. They are basically more of a reactive and survival sort of mechanism. This other question here about the labor movement. I should be clear that I think the labor movement is absolutely necessary, and we can't just get rid of it. And there's a sort of distinction to draw here between, say, the working class as people working in industries and manufacturing and factories and these sorts of things, versus the proletariat as those without access to the means of production. And I would assume all of us, or 99% of us, not 99%, all of us here are proletariats. We don't have access to the means of production. We need to work to survive. And in this sense, we're all part of the working class, and we have to think about how to mobilize this. But I think, what I take from Occupy, for instance, is that there already is a sort of class consciousness idea. There already is this sense that things are fucked up and we need to change things. The only issue is how do we actually do it? And I think we have to think about where are the material points of pressure. I don't think sort of disrupting bankers' lunches by occupying Zuccotti Park is going to do it. I think you need to think more about port blockades. You need to think about, sort of key points about where production is centered on particular things. There's an interesting sort of example in China. I forget the name of the group right now, but it's basically a shoe supplier who's managed to monopolize the market. So actually, instead of Nike and Adidas having power, the buyers having power, it's the shoe supplier which has power. Which means that when this shoe supplier factory goes on strike, it shuts down the entire shoe industry in the entire globe. So there's certain areas in which there still is a significant amount of power for a sort of traditional factory strike. We just have to give some more thought about where these places are. Just going on strike isn't going to do it. We have to think about pinpointing exactly where to go on strike. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, Michael.
Where do we spend most of our time when we're not sleeping? It seems to me if we're not working, most of us are working, not all of us, but if we're working, that's where we spend most of our time. So when can the common interests of working people who have to work for a living against capital, because the fundamental contradiction of this modern society is between capital and labour. It's not between capital and consumers. It's not between capital and government. It's between capital and labour. That's the fundamental contradiction. There are other contradictions there in a modern society, but that's the fundamental one. And where do we spend most of our time as labour? Is at work. So it seems to me that is where the common interest is most likely to be gelled. It's not going to be gelled by boycotts of particular goods, however important that might be, or by other methods of occupation and so on, which also may be part of just a particular tactic. It's going to be gelled by the common interest people have at work, because that's where they spend most of their time, that's where they meet most of their people, and quite often that's who they marry. So the whole thing is connected together in work, and labour is the key to this process, not anywhere else. So it seems to me we have to, if we're looking for how we're going to build class consciousness, because the fundamental contradiction is between class contradiction between capital and labour, then it's going to be done at work. Now maybe there'll be new forms. Maybe the old forms of organising at work, trade unions, rotten ones and otherwise, may be replaced by some other organisation, but it's still another way of organising labour. And if they're going to be organising labour, they're going to be over conditions at work to begin with. Then there's going to be, well, we can't solve conditions at work without changing the government or changing bigger issues and big laws and things. So then it becomes more of a political thing which connects together. So that's the history of working class struggle against capital. And that process doesn't, it seems to me, really change whether we're in a post-industrial society or not. And until we move to a transition, a society where we don't work, or toil, to be more exact, then that is where the basis of consciousness for trying to change the society is going to take place. And the point to remember is that you can only change society to a society of freedom, where we don't toil, where we can use our time by using the technology collectively. It means ending the power of capital, the capitalist mode of production. A post-industrial society, a leisure society, will not happen without the removal of the mode of capitalist production, which is the dominant form in the globe at the moment.
Thank you, Michael. I'll just note, by the way, that I'll be sending this collections box around at some point if any of you are kind enough to give a donation to our cause, but you might find it's not just an arbitrary money box, it is officially sanctioned by the group. So if I can just pass that around to the front. And I believe there's some people at the back, so if we can start, there's a guy here on the end, Dave, just there, and then if the guy who's waving there, over there, him, the first one. Then if we go down to Natalia and then the people who are behind the pillar, and then I'll try and fit you in, and then we'll come back.
I'd like to maybe disagree with the panel a little bit and perhaps the mode of analysis of this talk, and talk about the challenge of achieving a post-industrial world. And I think in order to achieve a new kind of renaissance for all of humanity, really, by liberating themselves from oil, as Michael might say, we need to maybe shift away from a Marxist mode of analysis where labour is a key defining part of our identity and the nature of production. If we're to avoid a situation where we become serfs essentially to the masters of capital, perhaps we need to remove ourselves from this idea of work entirely and to rob them of that control. If we maintain this Marxist analysis of labour being central and part of our identity, perhaps we're going towards an idea of capitalism which means that we're entirely at the whim of those who control capital rather than being a democratic body that should benefit from advances in technology. Michael's focus on toil is a great example of the fact that the leisure and the idea of the creation of the weekend was the creation of factory owners originally. The weekend as a thing didn't exist. They have created the idea of leisure, and it's historical, our idea of what work is. And I think maybe we need to move away from that in order to achieve the utopia, as we call it.
Thank you. Natalia here, and then I believe there's some people behind the pillar who've been waiting, then the guy at the end. And if there's not too much there, move over there. If there is, I'll bring it back to the panel and throw it back out again.
Hi, I'm aware tonight that there's been a lot of talk about deindustrialization as some sort of idealized utopia. I'm just wondering, actually, I mean, before I came to the talk, I was thinking a lot about deindustrialization and what that actually means for northern communities in particular in the present time, who are still suffering the consequences of deindustrialization, and what sort of happens in the interim, and what are the solutions that we could actually have in these communities in the present time.
Thank you. Sorry, who was waiting behind the pillar here?
Hi, I'll be very brief. Where would you locate agriculture and agrarian relationships as in-class consciousness in contemporary capitalism, and then how would you imagine them or envision them in a post-capitalist society?
Thank you. Chap at the back there.
Cheers. I suppose I want to say, well, there's a question about whether we're seeing deindustrialization globally, which there seems to be a disagreement on, which is still kind of hanging and sort of important. But I suppose I want to move on and think that, for me, from my experience of work, if there's anything that's more striking than anything, is how effective management is at actually preventing dissent from growing. And obviously, workplace insecurity, increasing performance-related measures are a key part of that. And that leads me, without wanting to be horribly pessimistic, to think that I'm not very confident of seeing mass resistance in Western societies in the workplace. But then the thing that sort of hangs in the horizon, I guess, is environmental destruction and the issue of sustainability, of infinite growth in a world of limited resources, and potentially a point of tension or break coming from environmental finite resources like oil, rather than, for example, mass workers' mobilisation, which is difficult to build at the moment. That's just maybe something to think about further. I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but yeah.
Thank you. And Dave, the woman right on the end of the bar over on this side, I'll bring it back to the panel.
Thank you. I was just wanting to sort of see if there was thank you both for the talks firstly, sorry about my voice, I've got a bit of a sore throat, but to sort of second what Ben's point was about the nature of the idea of class as something that can politically mobilise, and whether or not that's relevant if we want to talk about moving on from work. but then also building on the point that I'm sorry, I don't know your name, with the denim shirt, about the what the purpose of society would be in a workless society. I think maybe it's an underestimation of people to think that they would be politically mobilised around the idea of a leisure society. I think that people need the idea of having purpose, and something that seems to be missing from the narrative of the future that you gave was something about ethics and morality and maybe humanism, and tying that possibly in with the environmental narrative that the guy who just spoke said, to create a purpose. I think that needs to be part of the agenda more than just the critique of what's already going on, but we need to think that we're working towards something which has meaning and is about justice that's beyond just material possessions that we own to get people excited.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the panel. Michael first, followed by Nick.
I think the question about agriculture, well, obviously we're going to continue to need agriculture in any society where we have to eat. So that development is also relevant to all the other sectors of production. It will require a reduction as much as possible of the time spent by human labour in doing it, by the use of the best technology, but production done on the basis of collective use to reduce the impact on environment, to avoid the exploitation of nature, and that will only be done through the use of technology where it's collectively organised and not for need and not for profit. A capitalist mode of production is destroying the planet, it's exhausting the natural resources, it's entering a period where we will be increasingly, agriculture will suffer along with nature in the most horrific manner. That process is continuing, and it will continue unless something is done about the way in which we organise human society now and end the rule of the owners of capital. Now, capitalism is 250 years old, and if you like, industrial capitalism. It could go a bit longer than that. That's actually a very short period of time in the history of human society. So I'm not entirely pessimistic that it's all hopeless and it won't progress. I know I won't be around here to find out probably, but the point is that it's really 250 years for a mode of production which, as Marx pointed out, was so dynamic that it's taken over the world in such a short period of time, is also means that at a certain point every mode of production is going to run out of steam because it's based on class basis and not on the collective need of the population. And we can only really free ourselves and move on from toil and work, moving on from work, is if we can move to a post-capitalist society, if you want to call it that, a society where the rule of capital doesn't dominate. And that is still to be achieved. So when we are, I think, at 67, I can remember when I was your age, everybody was talking about revolution next week. Now, you young people are telling me it's all hopeless. And I think that's perfectly understandable because we have a changed situation. But it's a fairly short period of time in the history of human organisation and of capitalist society, really. So we may, you and you, certainly me, but you may not actually see dramatic change towards a post-capitalist society in your lifetime. You may. But the point is that it's you shouldn't assume that just because things are terrible over the last 25, 30 years, that that's the way it's always going to be, and it's to do with the fact that the industrial working class has disappeared, and the working class now has no more consciousness, and we can't move towards a workless society where people can organise together collectively to use the technology, because there is no working class, and it won't organise, and it will never change.
Thank you, Michael. And Nick.
Yeah, so sort of the first question there, at least the way I've interpreted it, is sort of this idea that the working class actually has a sort of contradictory role, which is that the working class has to mobilize to eliminate itself, at least as a social category. So this is you know, it's tough to sort of conceptually think about, but you know, it's progressively done by achieving more and more free time, more and more liberation from reliance upon work in order to survive. But this is, you know, the very role of the proletariat is to overcome itself. Yeah. Now, there was another question about so how to cope with deindustrialization, particularly in the north of England. I can't say I know enough about the local economy to give any sort of policy suggestions. But I think it's a mistake to try